Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to this video titled Percents, Fractions, and Decimals. And for this video, you'll need to get out your Go Math book and turn to page 209. Get out your math journal and a pencil. Now the goal for this video is for you to write equivalent percents, fractions, and decimals. So we're going to look at how to take a percent, change it to a fraction, change it to a decimal, also fractions to percents and decimals, and so on. So let's take a look at page 209, and we have a few problems there at the bottom. We have 15%, 48%, 80%, and 75%. So what we're going to take a look at is how to take these percentages and how to write them as a fraction and also as a decimal. Okay, so it's important to understand that when we have a percentage, like 15%, if you want to change it to a decimal, what you do is you understand that the decimal is to the right of the ones place. Even though it's not there, it's to the right of the ones place. So if you want to change that percent to a decimal, what you do is you take that decimal point and move it 2 places to the left. And we can see that 15% is equal to 15 hundredths. You just move that decimal point 2 places to the left, whatever percentage you have, and that'll make it into the decimal. Why is this the case? Because 15%, if you remember, a percent is always out of 100, equals 15 hundredths there. Okay, and when we talk about 15 hundredths, writing that as a decimal looks just like that. Now, if we're going to take that 15% and change it into a fraction, as you know, percentages are always out of 100. So what we have, writing this as a fraction, is 15 over 100. However, that is not simplified at all. So what we need to do, we need to simplify it. So we need to think about what number can go into 15 and 100, or think about the greatest common factor of 15 and 100. Okay, that's how we simplify fractions, and 5 is the GCF of 15 and 100. So what we do is we take 15 divided by 5, that's going to give us 3. 100 divided by 5, and that's going to give us 20. So 15% as a decimal is 15 hundredths, and as a fraction, it's 3/20ths. Starts out as 15 over 100, then we just reduce it. So let's take a look at number 2. 48%. So again, 48%, we're going to change that to a decimal. It's understood that the decimal is to the right of the ones place if we don't see it in our number. Changing it into a decimal, you take that decimal, move it 2 places to the left for 48 hundredths. So that's 48% as a decimal. If we're going to write it as a fraction, remember, since it's a percent, it's out of 100, so we have 48 over 100. So when we think about what's the greatest common factor of 48 and 100, it's going to be 4. So we're going to divide both numerator and denominator by 4. 48 divided by 4 is 12. 100 divided by 4 is 25. So we have 12 25ths for the fraction of 48%. Let's take a look at 80%. Again, we take that 80%, write the 80, decimal is right here, change it 2 places, or move it 2 places to the left. We have 0.8 now for our decimal. We don't need the 80 there. And then 80% is a fraction. Remember, it's 80 over 100. Think about the greatest common factor of 80 and 100. It's going to be 20. So I take both numerator and denominator, I divide that by 20, and that's going to give me 4/5. So 80% as a decimal is 8/10, and as a fraction, 4/5. So I want you to do number 4 with me. We have 75%. And what you can do is write the number 75 down, understood to have the decimal to the right of the ones place. Move that decimal 2 places to the left. Anytime you're taking a percentage and changing it to a decimal, you always move that decimal 2 places to the left. So that's 75 hundredths. And why would it be 75 hundredths, not just 75? Think about the video from the previous lesson where we had that big grid of 100, and 75% would mean 75 hundredths. All those little squares represent a hundredth. 75 of those little hundredths are shaded in out of 100. So 75 hundredths as the decimal. And then as the fraction, we have 75 over 100. You always start out with the fraction over that percentage as the numerator. Denominator is going to be 100. Why is that? Because percents are always out of 100. Gray's common factor of 75 and 100 is 25. So we're going to divide both numerator and denominator by 25. And that will give us 3/4. So 75% as a decimal is 75 hundredths. As a fraction is 3/4. So let's take a look at the problems on page 212. It's saying write each fraction as a decimal and as a percent. So now we start out with a fraction, got to write as a decimal and a percent. So one of the ways to write the fraction as a decimal is you take that numerator and you divide it by the denominator, and that could give you the decimal. So 9 divided by 25 is 36 hundredths. Now, here's a little trick. If you're going to take a decimal to a percent, which was the opposite of what we were doing, we were going from percents to decimals, but decimal to percent, you take that decimal and move it 2 places to the right, and that'll show you what the percent would be. So 36 hundredths as a percent would be 36%. Now, another way that you could go about doing this, you would have 9 over 25. You want to set it up as a proportion, would equal a certain number over 100. Why 100? Because remember, percents are always out of 100. So this is another way that you could do this. You multiply 9 times 100. That's going to give us 900. And then you can divide by 25. And that will give you 36, which would represent the percent. Okay, so this is how you could find the percentage. You could set it up as a proportion, cross multiply, and then divide by the other number. It's another way of doing it. Now we have 7/8. So as a decimal, 7/8, you can take 7, divide it by 8, and that's going to give you 0.875 or 875 thousandths. So that's as a decimal. Now the question is, how do we do this as a percent? So remember what I talked about. Decimal to percent, what you do is you take that decimal point and move it 2 places to the right. This is decimal to percent, which would give you 87.5%. Another way you could do this, 7 over 8 is going to equal a certain number over 100. Why 100? Because remember, percents are always out of 100. Cross multiply, 7 times 100 equals 700. 700 divided by 8 is going to give you 87.5. So that would be the percent there. Okay, now if you're going to take this percent to the decimal, remember 2 places to the left for the decimal, 875 thousandths. So let's take a look at page 213. We're going to take a look at number 16 and 17, some real world problems. So it says the poster shows how many of its games the football team has won so far. Express this information as a fraction, a percent, and as a decimal. So if we're thinking of this as a fraction, 12 out of 15 is going to give you 12/15. Now we're going to write this in simplest terms, so we're going to divide both by the greatest common factor, which is 3. So that's going to be 4/5. So this is a pretty good starting point here. 4/5 is the fraction, and I want you to do this with me. Now we're going to take 4/5 and we're going to write this as a percent. So what we can do for 4/5 is we have 4/5 is going to equal something over 100. And that something is going to be our percent. So what we do, multiply 4 times 100. That's going to give us 400. And then when we're doing this as a proportion, we got to take that 400 and divide it by 5. And that's going to give us 80. So that's 80%. Now we need to think about how to take a percent and change it to a decimal. So we can take 80, the number, understand that the decimal is to the right of that 0, move it 2 places to the left, and that's your decimal, 0.8. Another way that you can find this, if you just want to go right from the fraction to the decimal, you can take your 4/5 that you have there and divide 4, divide it by 5. That's going to give you 0.8. So that would be another way to find the answer to that as well. So finally, let's take a look at number 17. It says Justine answered 68 questions correctly on an 80-question test. So we're going to express this amount as a fraction, percent, and decimal. So we have 68 out of 80 questions. So finding this as a fraction, we got to reduce it first. 68 divided by 4 is 17. 80 divided by 4 is 20. So 17/20 is the fraction. Remember, we got to reduce it to simplest terms. Now if we're trying to figure out 17/20 as a percent, we can do 17/20 is equal to something over 100. I think we know the drill by now. 17 times 100. It's 1,700. Then we got to divide by that 20. And we can see that's going to give us 85 for the percent. So 85%, not too bad for a test. And then if we're taking that 85%, turning it into a decimal, remember it's understood that the decimal is to the right of the ones place. If we don't see it already, move that decimal 2 places to the left for 0.85. So this concludes the video for percents, fractions, and decimals. If you have any questions about this concept, please come and see me.